An IBM audit is normally started by the selected customer receiving a letter from IBM, either sent by IBM or one of the auditors, to notify them a request for audit and typically a request for meeting to kick off the audit as well. I think from an activity level wise, IBM audits, the quantity wise, remains similar to the past couple of years. But one of the changes we've seen is IBM has gradually moving down the ladder. A lot of SMEs, companies with less than 2,000 employees are being picked by IBM as an audit target, which they wouldn't in the previous couple of years. I think traditionally, the big IBM findings, the easy money for IBM is always around virtualization licensing, which IBM calls subcapacity licensing. In a kind of a long story short, most organizations, customers, they aren't aware of the requirement of installing an IBM monitoring tool to be eligible to pay for just the virtual capacity, and by forgetting that or not doing that, they're held responsible or liable to pay for the whole underlying physical capacity. So that is still very common, especially with small and medium enterprises who, in general, a lot of the procurement teams don't really read the contracts and the small print. Other things like user licenses, how you control licenses, especially for products like Cognos or Maximal, that's become more and more popular. And also I've seen in audits IBM emphasizing more in those areas now in the past 12 months. Yeah. Right, so subcapacity is actually a default licensing rule that's embedded in IBM's Passport Advantage agreement. So if you're an IBM customer, you'll be restricted by that agreement. So unless you have really small environment, which IBM allows you to conduct manual reporting, otherwise, 99% of the customer will need to install an IBM monitoring tool called IBM License Metric Tool, or LLMT, in order to be eligible for subcapacity licensing. Otherwise, they will be paying for the full capacity of the underlying physical infrastructure. I think most of the audits today are still being conducted by IBM's audit partners, which globally is the two audit firms, Deloitte and KPMG. Occasionally, IBM would do some of the self-reviews, small reviews themselves, which we've seen in the past year. I think that is increasing slightly, but the overall population is still quite small. I would say, in my experience defending IBM audits, over 90% of the audits are still done by the two big auditors. IBM is doing very well by publishing the license entitlements and the rules, everything online, but it requires a lot of research to really understand what the licensing rules means. On the other hand, in terms of how to track those licenses, the methods, it's not really organized in any way. You may be able to find that answer through the technical documents. For example, how do you identify the concurrent license counts? How do you identify user access rights within different systems? However, that knowledge is not really structured in any way or published by IBM at all. So the best source of that knowledge is actually being held by IBM's audit partners globally. This is simply because they have been doing their research and using their experience over the past 15 years being IBM's audit partner. But outside of that environment, really that knowledge is not structured in any way. During the Amsterdam workshop, I'll be sharing my experience with audience in a couple areas. First of all, obviously describe what happens in an audit, what are the typical stages in an audit life cycle. What are the risks involved, what can go wrong, how unaware customers can provide information not necessary to IBM, and then increase their risk of exposure. And also on the other side, how they can manage this risk and mitigate those risks whenever possible. So that will be basically what we'll be covering in Amsterdam.